The first tremor came at dawn, rippling across the pale heliographic shield that had been suspended above the capital of the United Human Provinces for 3 generations. Few citizens noticed it at first. Most were on their way to early shifts, guiding skimmers through glimmering lanes or descending into the layered terraces that composed the colossal agricultural strata. Only those with a habit of gazing up, those few who still found wonder in a sky so carefully curated by layers of atmospheric engineering, saw the faint shimmer pulse outward like a wrinkle across a giant pane of transparent crystal. Some pointed, most shrugged. Everyone had grown accustomed to minor disturbances. The shield, after all, deflected everything from micrometeorites to stray radiation gusts. But the tremor was not a meteorological hiccup, nor was it caused by atmospheric distortions. It was a warning, a subtle clue, the first gentle note in a storm symphony that would soon roar across worlds. That morning, Commander Aderin Fost did not look up to see the ripple, for she was already beneath the surface, deep inside the hardened sublevels of the Strategic Response Spire. She stood inside the central command chamber, an amphitheater of hollow displays and data fountains that cascaded shimmering layers of information into the air. Aderin had been awake long before dawn. She rarely slept past 3 in the morning, a habit ingrained by decades of service and sharpened by an instinct she trusted more than any advisory protocol. When the call came, a simple chime indicating a non-emergency inquiry from the outer watch, she was on her feet instantly, coffee forgotten on her desk. At first, the report sounded routine, unexplained oscillations along the heliographic shield, followed by faint gravitational disturbances registering along the planet's far side. But the tone in the watch officer's voice unsettled her. He was trying to sound calm. He was failing. Aderin keyed open the full report, scanning the lines as fast as they populated. The gravitational readings were clear. Something enormous had entered the star system, bypassing the long-range surveillance rings without triggering a single alarm. That was impossible. The surveillance rings covered every approach vector, every slingshot path, every conceivable hiding place. They were more sensitive than any early warning system humanity had ever engineered. Something capable of slipping past them either possessed technology far beyond human comprehension or had found a way to disable the rings from a distance. Either option signaled catastrophe. As she studied the numbers, a dull ache settled behind her eyes. She sensed it, the shift in the air, the intangible weight of impending upheaval. Humanity had known decades of peace, prosperity, and expansion across neighboring systems. But peace, in Aderin's experience, was rarely more than a pause between trials. Before she could issue an inquiry, the chamber lights shifted to emergency crimson, bathing the metallic architecture in a blood-hued glow. A voice spoke from the ceiling, calm yet heavy. Unidentified mass approaching planetary perimeter at high velocity. Strategic Command personnel report to stations immediately. Aderin did not need the reminder. She was already in motion. Technicians and officers streamed into the chamber, taking positions at their consoles. Data structures and projections swirled into place, forming a constantly shifting tapestry of stellar coordinates, energy signatures, and shield integrity readings. "Open a channel to the outer watch," Aderin commanded, her voice cutting through the rising tension like a razor through cloth. A hollow image materialized above the central dais, depicting a wide-angle view from the furthest orbital sentinel. At first, the visuals showed nothing out of place, just the majesty of the local star casting radiant waves across the dark expanse. But as the sentinel magnified its focus, the disturbance came into view. A black silhouette. No, not black, rather, an absence. As though a portion of the universe itself had been carved out. The object absorbed light, energy, and even sensor emissions. No reflections, no thermal radiation, no spectrographic fingerprint. It was not a ship, not in any recognizable sense. It resembled an immense oval of void stuff, rippling subtly like the surface of a living membrane. "What is that?" someone whispered. Aderin did not answer. She could not. The sentinel shifted its perspective. Lines of energy began to pulse across the oval's edges, like veins illuminated beneath alien skin. The pulses grew brighter, their rhythm steady and deliberate. Aderin recognized the pattern, though she had never seen it before. Communication, or preparation. Raise the planetary shield to maximum output, she ordered. All defense sectors to full alert. Evacuate surface zones nearest the perimeter. Officers sprinted to relay the commands. The chamber filled with controlled chaos, yet the oval did not slow. It accelerated, then without warning it unfolded. The membrane peeled open like an iris, revealing a churning interior of colors no human eye had evolved to see. Hues that bent around perception, forcing the Sentinel's filters into frantic recalibration. Those who could not look away found themselves describing impossible things, spirals that moved without rotating, shapes defined only by their absence, movements occurring before they began. Then the iris discharged a beam, but beam was not the right word. The discharge resembled a unidirectional rift, an incision across space that elongated towards the planet at a speed beyond tracking. It did not glow or radiate. It simply existed for a moment, then vanished. A heartbeat later, the heliographic shield rippled again. This time, every citizen felt it. The tremor shook towers, rattled subterranean transport rails, and sent shockwaves across inland seas. The shield held, barely. In the command chamber, systems flickered, readouts blurred. When the displays stabilized, the shield integrity had fallen by 12%. That number might as well have been a death sentence. The shield's full capacity should have prevented such a drop from anything short of a stellar flare. "We are under attack," Aderin announced. Not as revelation, everyone knew it. But a commander's voice could transform panic into purpose. "Open a full system broadcast. Get me the provincial leadership. Mobilize the fleet." The object outside the system shifted again. This time it produced sound, not through space, but through the Sentinel's sensors, which interpreted the vibration as audio. The chamber filled with a deep, oscillating growl that resonated more in bone than ear. Officers winced. Aderin dug her nails into her palms to remain grounded. The Sentinel translated the vibrations into a waveform. The pattern was regular, intentional. She knew then that this was far worse than a random anomaly or a rogue construct. Something sentient was approaching, something vastly more advanced than any civilization humanity had encountered. The growl continued. Then it modulated into a rising screech before the audio collapsed into static. The Sentinel's feed cut to black. "Was it destroyed?" an officer asked. "Yes," Aderin replied. "Prepare retaliatory protocols." Even as the words left her mouth, she knew retaliation would be symbolic at best. Humanity had weapons capable of defending against known threats: pirate fleets, rogue warlords, hostile enclaves still clinging to the ruins of the old wars. But this was something from beyond, and perhaps beyond the beyond. The oval entity drifted closer. Its membrane quivered like a breathing lung. Aderin watched it, feeling the weight of responsibility settle around her like armor. For centuries, humanity had risen, reclaimed, reinvented, and persevered. They had spread across systems. They had survived their own folly. They had discovered wonders and horrors, forging strength from both. If an apex species had come to challenge them, humanity would not cower. They would stand as they always had, but bravery did not replace preparation. "Signal the fleet," Aderin said. "All vessels are to converge around the shield perimeter. No exceptions." Across orbit, engines ignited. Ships launched, sleek cruisers, heavy dread carriers, agile strikers, all moving into formation. Aderin watched them as they arranged themselves along the defensive lattice. 1,000 glints of silver and obsidian against the vast dark. Her heart clenched with pride, yet the void oval did not slow. Distances shrank. The chamber lights dimmed as systems rerouted energy to global defense grids. Aderin noticed another tremor in the shield's telemetry, but this one was different, not an external strike, internal interference. "Report," she commanded. A technician's voice quivered. Something is happening inside the shield. Energy dispersal nodes are fluctuating. It's as if something is resonating with the shield, Aderin finished. The object pulsed once more. For a fleeting moment, she sensed its attention shifting, not scanning the planet, not targeting individuals, but noticing. Presence met presence. A tiny whisper clawed along Aderin's mind, not words, not meaning, only sensation, like a brush against the outside of her thoughts. She staggered, gripping the edge of the dais. "Are you all right, Commander?" "I'm fine," she replied quietly, though she was not certain it was true. Something had touched her mind, or attempted to. The thought chilled her deeper than the cosmic threat looming above. Humanity had encountered psychic phenomena before, rare, unpredictable, usually tied to exotic anomalies or experimental research fields still considered hypothetical by mainstream science. But this felt deliberate, ancient, hungry. She steadied herself. "Prepare counter-resonance protocols. Do not let anything tamper with our networks." Officers scrambled. The void oval pulsed again. This time, its energy output spiked so violently that the displays momentarily shorted. When they returned, the object had changed shape. It now resembled a colossal spine made of interlocking plates, each plate folding and unfolding like armored wings. It moved with a serpentine grace, twisting across dimensions in ways that defied the rules of physics. "It's initiating another discharge," someone reported. "Impact in 20 seconds. Aderin's pulse hammered in her ears. Divert all shield energy to the outer layer. Reinforce node clusters at vectors 60, 73, and 90. 15 seconds. Aderin closed her eyes briefly, steadying her breathing. "Prepare for impact." 10. The object brightened. 5. Aderin exhaled. "Brace." The second strike hit with a force that felt like a star collapsing into itself. The shield flared white. The ground shook. Buildings quivered. Oceans swelled. Clouds were ripped apart. And for a moment, the world became light. When vision returned, the chamber was filled with sparks, smoke, and the groans of stressed machinery. Officers coughed and steadied themselves. Aderin blinked away tears, scanning the readouts. The shield integrity had fallen by another 28%. Combined with the first drop, barely 60% remained. A third strike would shatter it. Humanity's last line of planetary defense would fall. And then extinction. "Has the object repositioned?" Aderin asked, though she already knew the answer from the sick feeling in her stomach. The technician shook his head, eyes wide. "It's preparing another discharge." Aderin took a breath. One, then another. She could not hesitate, not now. "Initiate Operation Dawn Spear." The chamber fell silent. Every face turned to her. Dawn Spear was not merely a defensive protocol. It was the contingency reserved for last resort scenarios, desperate measures for existential threats. It authorized the deployment of humanity's most dangerous asset, the Stellar Forge Array, buried deep within the planet's crust, capable of unleashing energy equivalent to a controlled micronova. The cost of using it was catastrophic. The array destabilized planetary tectonics. Firing it risked permanent damage to the world's mantle. It was a weapon never meant to be used on or near a homeworld. But the alternative was annihilation. An officer stammered, "Commander, the Planetary Council has not yet. I am invoking emergency command override," Aderin said. "Authorization seal Aderin Fost, Gamma Prime." Her voice did not tremble. "Initiate, now." The officer nodded, turning to execute the command. But before the sequence could begin, the chamber darkened again. The object outside the system released a new pulse, not towards the shield, but towards the fleet. The pulse expanded like a wave of darkness, ebbing forward with impossible speed. Human ships attempted evasive maneuvers, but the wave washed over them. One by one, their engines flickered and died. Lights dimmed. Weapons went silent. Communications cut. Within seconds, the entire defensive fleet hung dead in orbit, silent silhouettes adrift above the world they had sworn to protect. Aderin steadied herself on the dais, eyes burning with fury. Humanity had always been underestimated by outside forces. Time and time again, they had been written off as fragile, chaotic, or primitive. But humanity was more than flesh and industry. They were defiance. They were resilience carved into the marrow of their species. They were the ones who had clawed their way back from extinction multiple times across history, plagues, wars, collapses, devastation, yet they endured. If this cosmic leviathan believed it could extinguish them, it would learn the truth. Humanity did not die quietly. Begin manual ignition of the stellar forge array, Aderin commanded. We will not surrender our home. Technicians worked frantically, but then a new signal appeared on the sensors. Aderin froze. It came from behind the object, something emerging through its iris-like membrane, another silhouette, smaller, more defined, angular, mechanical, a vessel. It detached from the iris, drifting forward like an insect birthed from a giant predator. Its surface glowed with shifting runes of pale violet, forming patterns that rearranged faster than the sensors could interpret. "What now?" someone whispered. The smaller vessel oriented toward the planet, then emitted a high-frequency broadcast. Unlike the growl from before, this transmission contained structure language, or the shell of one, the signal translated into mathematical patterns, then into geometric sequences, then into prime number iterations, a greeting, or a claim, or a test. The larger entity pulsed in response. The smaller vessel drifted closer. The tension in the chamber thickened. Every officer, every technician, every soul in the room felt the pressure, building an invisible force pressing against their thoughts, probing deeper, seeking entry. Aderin grit her teeth, resisting the intrusion. She knew then that the first attack had not been an attempt to annihilate. It had been a demonstration, a warning, a sample of its capability, and now the entity was preparing the real assault. The chamber crackled with static, displays warped. For a split second, Aderin saw an image, an impossible vision of cities burning beneath a sky of fractured stars. She shook her head violently. "Shut out the telepathic interference," she barked, but the technicians could not respond. They were frozen, eyes unfocused, minds ensnared. Aderin was the only one still conscious enough to move. She staggered to the command console, gripping its edges so hard her knuckles whitened. Something pressed against her mind again, this time more forcefully. A voice, not a voice, but a concept echoed through her consciousness. An invitation, submit. She snarled aloud, never. With the last of her will, she slammed her palm onto the emergency override. The stellar forge array began to awaken. Deep underground reactors rumbled. Energy conduits ignited. The planet itself seemed to inhale. Aderin stared at the displays as the sequence progressed. She did not know if she would live through what came next. She only knew that humanity must. Then everything stopped. The energy buildup halted. The array froze mid-ignition. Aderin blinked in confusion. Systems that had been roaring to life now sat silent. The technicians slumped in place, unconscious. The chamber's air felt thick, heavy, electric, and then a new voice spoke inside her mind. Clear, cold. "Ancient, you resist well. This world is worthy of claiming." Aderin's fury ignited hotter than fear. "Humanity," she whispered, "belongs to no one." Once more the sky trembled. This time it was only the beginning. The chamber lights remained dim, their one steady glow reduced to a dull flicker that cast elongated shadows across the metallic floor. Commander Aderin Fost stood at the center of the Strategic Response Spire's command amphitheater, alone among dozens of unconscious officers. The silence was oppressive, though beneath it lurked a low hum of vibration that seemed to emanate not from the walls, nor from the machinery, but from the very air itself. It pulsed in slow, rhythmic waves, like the breathing of some unseen titan. The voice that had invaded her consciousness still reverberated faintly in her mind, not as words or even thoughts, but as a lingering pressure. Aderin steadied her breathing, wiping a trail of blood from her nose. The psychic assault, if that was the proper term, had been unlike anything she had ever encountered. Humanity had studied exotic mental phenomena for generations, but this entity, this intelligence, operated on principles far beyond their comprehension. Yet she had resisted it, alone. That realization both humbled and unsettled her. because it meant the entity had not been truly trying. If it had, she suspected her mind would have shattered like fragile glass dropped into a flame. Around her, officers began to stir. One groaned softly, clutching his head. Another blinked rapidly, as if struggling to reorient reality itself. Aderin knelt beside a communications specialist whose face was pale and beaded with sweat. "Easy," she said, her voice steady but low. "What happened?" the specialist whispered. "It felt like something was inside my thoughts." "It was," Aderin replied. "But it's gone now. Focus on recovery." She moved from one technician to another, assessing injuries and consciousness levels. Most were stable, some would need medical assistance. All were shaken. One officer, young, barely past his induction year, grabbed her wrist with trembling fingers. "Commander, did we survive?" Aderin met his trembling gaze. "For now." She rose to her feet, her knees protesting from the strain. The displays above her still flickered with corrupted imagery, lines of distorted symbols cascading across them like broken code. But one panel managed to stabilize enough to show the current orbital situation. The vast voidentity still hovered at the edge of the shield, motionless yet oppressive. The smaller vessel, angular, runed, shimmering, now positioned itself directly in front of the shield like a herald awaiting permission to enter. Aderin clenched her jaw. "Status of the stellar forge array?" she asked. No one responded. The technicians simply looked at her, bewildered, as if she had asked them to recite a language they had never learned. The systems should have been online, they should have been humming with the seismic growl of accumulated energy, but instead, the forge array lay dormant, as though whatever force had seized the planet's networks had simply reached down and turned off the most powerful weapon humanity had ever created. She approached the primary console and manually accessed the forge's subterranean telemetry. To her disbelief, the entire grid displayed flawless functionality. No structural faults, no power fluctuations, no component failures. Yet the sequence remained frozen, suspended in an impossible state, neither inactive nor active, caught between potential and realization, held, controlled, by something outside. Aderin exhaled slowly. The entity was not simply observing. It had reached into the world's infrastructure with effortless precision and seized control. Not to destroy, not yet, but to prevent retaliation. Her pulse quickened. The implication was devastating. The entity viewed humanity's most powerful weapon as less than threat, more an inconvenience to disable, and it had done so without exerting visible effort. "Commander." A voice came from the stairway leading into the amphitheater. Aderin turned sharply. Captain Joram Rail descended the steps with a grim expression. His uniform was torn at the shoulder, and he bore a fresh burn mark across his jaw. But he walked with purpose, eyes sharp despite the trauma. Aderin felt a wave of relief. Joram was more than a subordinate, he was someone she trusted beyond protocol or rank. He approached, lowering his voice. "Reports are coming in from all over the continent. People felt something pressing against their thoughts. Some passed out completely. No fatalities yet, but the psychic resonance caused widespread panic." Aderin nodded. "And the fleet? Dead in orbit?" Joram replied bitterly. "Every vessel, engine cores offline, weapon systems unresponsive. Even their air recyclers froze for several seconds before backup layers kicked in." He paused, jaw tightening. It was deliberate, a precise attack, disabling only what it chose. Aderin did not respond immediately. The entity's behavior was chillingly methodical, disabling defensive capabilities while leaving life support systems intact. "A conqueror's move, not a destroyer-s," Joram continued. "The Planetary Council is assembling. They request your presence via secure channel." "Not yet," Aderin said. "They'll receive my strategic briefing after I understand precisely what we are facing." Joram hesitated before stepping closer. "Commander, whatever that thing is, whatever they are, it made contact with your mind, didn't it?" She met his gaze. She saw concern, fear, loyalty. She chose her words carefully. "It did, but I am still myself." "For now," Joram murmured. She ignored the insinuation and turned toward the viewing platform. The void entity's surface rippled again. The smaller vessel emitted another pulse, a geometric broadcast that cascaded across the shield like a pebble dropped into calm water. But this time, the pulse did not attack. It probed, test after test, pressure against the shield, then release, pressure, then release, like fingers knocking on a door. Adarin's voice lowered. "It wants us to respond." Joram frowned. Respond how, with what? Adarin did not know, yet she sensed one truth. Silence was no longer an option. Humanity had been noticed, chosen, evaluated, and something awaited their answer. A soft alarm chimed at her console. Incoming transmission. Unfiltered, raw, forced past their intercept protocols as though such systems did not exist. Adarin accepted the feed with clenched teeth. The amphitheater darkened, and then the air filled with light. Not projected light, manifest light. A three-dimensional form coalesced above the dais, shimmering like a sculpture forged from fractured dimensions. The image flickered between shapes: humanoid, serpentine, insectoid, geometric, impossible, before stabilizing into a figure tall and slender, with limbs too long and angles too acute for human proportions. A crystalline lattice drifted around its form like an orbiting crown. The chamber lights buzzed and dimmed under its presence. Officers froze, some gasped, others recoiled. Adarin alone stood still, staring down the impossible apparition. The figure spoke, not through sound, but through resonance vibrations that bypassed ears and echoed directly within each mind. "We have come to evaluate, to determine worth, to decide which worlds shall join the continuum ascendant." Officers clutched their temples. Joram staggered, catching himself on a railing. Adarin forced her mind to remain focused. "State your identity," she said aloud. The figure tilted its head. Its eyes, if the swirling voids could be called eyes, locked onto hers. "We are designated in your cognition as the sovereign echo, the instrument of assessment, the hand that measures potential, the judgment that precedes integration." "Is integration voluntary?" Adarin asked. The figure pulsed. "Volition is irrelevant. Outcomes are predetermined by capability. Those who demonstrate resilience are preserved. Those who fail are repurposed." Repurposed. The word sent a chill through the chamber. Adarin took a step forward. "Humanity does not submit to external rule. We are not subjects. We are not assets. We stand as equals to any who challenge us." The figure's form twisted, shifting between dozens of shapes in seconds. "Your resistance is noted. Your defiance is expected. It is why your world was chosen." Adarin's breath caught. Chosen for what? The entity's answer resonated like 1,000 bells collapsing at once. Ascension or eradication? Murmurs erupted among the officers. Some stumbled back. Joram swore under his breath. Adarin remained unflinching. "We choose our own destiny." "Incorrect," the sovereign echo replied. "Your destiny is determined by your response to the trials ahead. We have measured your defenses. Insufficient. We have tested your fleet. Inadequate. We have touched your collective consciousness." Fragmented. Adarin snapped. "You will find humanity is far more united than you assume." The figure's form rippled like liquid glass. "Unity is not your strength. Defiance is. Adaptation is. Survival is." The air thickened. Adarin's skin prickled. She sensed the presence's attention narrowing, gathering into a single focused point. Her. "You resist intrusion. You endure pain. You remain conscious when others fall. You represent the apex of your species' will." Adarin felt suddenly cold. "You will be tested first." Before she could speak, the figure dissolved, particles vanishing into the air like fading embers. The chamber's lights flared back to life. Officers gasped for breath as though resurfacing from deep water. Joram rushed to Adarin's side. "Commander, what did it mean?" She shook her head slowly. "It means humanity's trial has begun." "What trial?" "All of them," she whispered. Without warning, the amphitheater shook violently. Panels burst. Sparks rained. Officers braced themselves. Adarin raced to the nearest functioning display and froze. The shield perimeter had erupted with dozens of shrinking voids. Each void collapsed inward, revealing projectiles, organic, metallic, or neither hurtling toward the planet at unimaginable speeds. They resembled spines, hooks, fractal coils, crystalline darts, thousands of them. Jorum's voice broke. They're attacking the surface directly, Aderen's mind raced. Impact vectors, every continent, every major city. There he stopped, eyes widening. Aderen saw it too. None of the projectiles were aimed at civilian sectors. Not a single one targeted population centers, infrastructure hubs, or agricultural strata. Instead, they're heading for military installations, Aderen breathed. Only military targets. The Sovereign Echo's words pulsed in her mind. You will be tested first. Before she could issue orders, the projectiles struck, not with explosions, but with expansion. Each spine blossomed upon impact, unfolding into biomechanical structures like blooming flowers made of armor and circuitry. Each structure released drones, sleek, predatory, each one shimmering with impossible energy signatures, and every drone began to advance. Aderen slammed her fist onto the command console. Deploy all ground forces, mobilize planetary mechanized divisions, activate every strategic bunker, every garrison, every automated turret, engage with full lethal capacity. Officers scrambled, issuing commands across global channels, but communications sputtered. Network interference surged. The entity was not disabling communications entirely, merely scrambling them, forcing humanity to adapt on the fly. Jorum shouted, "They're targeting our strategic capabilities. They want to cripple our defenses, not exterminate our people." Aderen's eyes hardened. "They want to see how we fight when we are pushed to the edge." Through the view screen, she saw atmospheric streaks, dropships activating emergency protocols, scrambling to reach defensive positions. Tanks rolled from subterranean hangars. Artillery cannons powered up. Combat frames awakened from their stasis bays. Humanity was mobilizing, but would it be enough? Aderen slammed open a secure channel to the Deep Command Network. "This is Commander Aderen Fost. I am invoking Planetary Unity Directive. All military branches, all continents, all provinces coordinate under single strategic authority." Officers stared at her in shock. This directive had not been used since the great wars of ancient centuries past. "Commander," Jorum murmured, "the Council may contest. Let them," she snapped. "Humanity does not have time for debate. We have been challenged." "We will answer as one," Jorum nodded. "Understood." Across the world, forces responded. Aderen's displays filled with unit confirmations, readiness updates, battlefield reports. The invasion had begun. Aderen turned to Jorum. "Prep the Spire's command bunker. We coordinate from below." He shook his head. "No, you're needed at the front." "I'm needed everywhere," she countered. "But if the entity wants to test me, then I will answer the test on my own terms." She headed for the exit. Jorum followed. "Where are you going?" Aderen's gaze burned with purpose. "To the surface, to fight." He grabbed her arm. "Commander, you are the strategic mind holding this world together. If you fall, then someone else will rise," she said. "That is humanity's strength. We do not break at one failure. We multiply through adversity." Jorum hesitated. Then he nodded slowly. "Then I'm coming with you." Aderen did not argue. "Prep an escort. We move in 90 seconds." Officers sprang into motion. As alarms blared and the Spire descended into organized frenzy, Aderen paused at the threshold of the command amphitheater. She looked back at the flickering displays, at the unconscious technicians, at the swirling chaos of signals charting humanity's desperate mobilization. She allowed herself one breath, one heartbeat, one moment to accept the enormity of what lay ahead. The Sovereign Echo had come as judge and challenger. It had tested their shield, their fleet, their minds. Now it unleashed its ground forces, expecting humanity to crumble, but it would learn. Humanity was not merely a species defined by survival. They were defined by defiance, adaptation, unity forged under fire. Aderen descended the stairs. The floor rumbled beneath her boots as distant structures burned. She tightened her fists. "If it wants a test," she whispered, "we will give it the answer of humanity." The sky above trembled once more, not with fear, but with the first rising roar of human resistance. The shuttle bay beneath the strategic response spire roared with activity as Commander Aderin Fost strode toward the armored transport craft waiting at the far end of the hangar. Engineers shouted over the din of engines warming up. Loader teams slid ammunition racks into mechanized exosuits. Medical personnel guided groggy, half-recovered officers into evacuation lifts. The entire facility thrummed like a single, enormous muscle preparing for impact. Aderin's boots struck the floor with steady, unhurried force. Joram Rail followed at her shoulder, his expression tight but resolute. Their escort team, 12 elite soldiers in reinforced combat armor, fell in behind them in a protective formation. The moment Aderin approached the transport, the crew chief snapped to attention. "Commander, flight path is clear for 30 clicks. Beyond that, interference increases dramatically. We've mapped 5 safe landing zones near the capital's outer defensive ring, but active hostilities. We'll adapt," Aderin said. "Open the hatch." The crew chief obeyed. As Aderin stepped inside, the shuttle's interior lights blinked rapidly, switching from standby blue to combat amber. The engines rumbled to full readiness. Joram strapped himself into the seat across from her. "Ground reports say the projectile structures unfolded into clusters of autonomous assault drones," he said as the hatch sealed. "They're fast, adaptable, and resistant to conventional small arms fire. Our heavy units are pushing back, but casualties are mounting." Aderin nodded. "Patterns. They're moving with coordinated purpose. They're testing our defenses, probing response times, firepower distribution, command latency. Measuring us," Aderin murmured. "The Sovereign Echo warned us this was a trial. Their forces will escalate based on our performance." "That's what worries me," Joram replied. "If this is their opening move." The shuttle lurched as thrusters engaged. Aderin felt the familiar pull of acceleration as they lifted into the air and shot through the hangar's exit tunnel. Outside, the capital sprawled beneath them, vast, layered, glinting, alive. Towers rose like metallic spires. Terraced agricultural fields shimmered with bioengineered crops. Transit lines streaked between districts in woven arcs of pale light. But now much of the beauty was overshadowed by smoke, fire, and motion. In the distance, pillars of flame erupted from the ground as defense cannons unleashed their fury. Anti-air turrets tracked incoming drones with blazing precision. Mechanized battle walkers marched through streets alongside infantry platoons, all coordinated under Aderin's emergency directive. The sky above the city was a war zone of streaking trails, crackling bursts, and burning debris. As they ascended, the shuttle's windows polarized automatically to protect the passengers' eyes. "Incoming contact," the pilot called out. "Hostile drone cluster at 3 o'clock, closing fast." Aderin unbuckled. "Open side viewport." The armored shutters slid aside to reveal a formation of dark crystalline constructs racing toward them. They resembled elongated prisms with serrated edges that twisted in ways no conventional aviation design allowed. As they approached, the constructs shifted formation, some rising, others dropping, creating a precise, net-like structure around the shuttle. "They're trying to box us in," Joram said. The pilot's hands flew across the controls. Initiating evasive, a spear of pale violet light lanced toward the shuttle. It missed by meters, but the shockwave sent the craft spinning. Aderin grabbed a support rail to steady herself. The soldiers did the same. "Retake control," she ordered. The pilot gritted his teeth as he fought the spin. Trying controls are resisting another jolt. A drone smashed its crystalline body against the shuttle's side, sending cracks crawling across the viewport. Aderin turned to her escort. "Open the emergency side ports. Target the joints between prism plates. Those are structural weaknesses." The soldiers hesitated. "Commander, that will depressurize." "Not fully. The ports are designed for partial release." "Move," they obeyed. 2 armored soldiers rushed to the side ports and unlocked the internal safeties. With a heavy clang, the ports slid open, exposing the interior to a rush of frigid air. The pressure drop was sharp but manageable. The soldiers braced their plasma lances in the openings and fired precise beams that sliced into the nearest drone's joints. It screeched a sound more felt than heard and spiraled downward, trailing sparks. Another took its place instantly. The prism constructs moved with uncanny coordination. They adapted their approach patterns, anticipating the soldiers' firing angles. Aderin saw the shift. "Rotate the shuttle 10 degrees starboard," she commanded. "Pilot now." The pilot obeyed without questioning. The sudden rotation exposed the drones, undersides less armored, more vulnerable. "Fire!" Aderin shouted. The soldiers unleashed a synchronized barrage. 4 drones shattered in seconds, their pieces tumbling like broken glass, but dozens more were coming. "Pilot," Aderin said sharply, "take us low, skim the rooftops, make them chase us through confined space." "That's suicidal," Joram snapped. "Exactly," Aderin replied. "They won't expect it." The pilot dove. The shuttle careened downward, engines screaming, until they were racing mere meters above the tallest structures. The drones followed, but their formations broke apart as they were forced to maneuver around obstacles. Some collided with towers. Others clipped rail systems or scraped against the sides of buildings, losing coherence. "Mark those weakened ones," Aderin said. Her soldiers took them down one by one with disciplined precision. Within seconds, the drone cluster had thinned dramatically. The remaining constructs began to retreat, spiraling upward toward the voidentity in the sky. "They're withdrawing," Joram said. "They lost too many. We adapted too fast," Aderin replied. "They weren't prepared for our unpredictability." Joram gave her a sidelong glance. "That might be the first advantage we've found against these things. Then we'll use it," she said, "again and again." The pilot guided the shuttle toward the designated landing zone, an open plaza adjacent to the capital's outer defensive ring. As the craft touched down, ground troops rushed to secure the perimeter. The hatch opened, releasing a wave of heat, dust, and the metallic tang of war into the cabin. Aderin stepped out and immediately felt the tremors beneath her feet, ripples of distant artillery strikes. The sky above was a swirling battlefield. A squad of armored infantry snapped to attention. "Commander, the western fortification line has engaged multiple hostiles. They're requesting command oversight." "Take me there," Aderin said. They moved at a jog through the plaza. Emergency sirens wailed. Fires burned. Civilians were being ushered into subterranean shelters by defense volunteers. Aderin saw fear in their eyes, but also determination. Humanity had lived through catastrophes before. They were born from countless cycles of collapse and resurgence. They knew how to survive. Reaching the fortification line, Aderin assessed the situation. The structures that had landed on the outskirts had expanded into towering biomechanical growth spires of living metal, their surfaces pulsing with alien light. From these spires emerged drones in waves, some skittering across the ground on jointed limbs, others hovering above like predatory insects, all radiating the same unsettling resonance that pressed against the mind. Human forces met them with heavy firepower. Battle tanks unleashed kinetic rounds that cratered the ground. Combat frames towering exosuits piloted by elite operators engaged hand-to-hand with larger drone units, blades clashing against crystalline limbs. Infantry squads moved between barricades, firing plasma rifles that left glowing streaks across the air. Aderin strode into the command trench. Officers immediately stepped aside. "Status," she demanded. The sector commander pointed to a tactical hologram. "Hostile spires are reinforcing themselves. Every time we destroy one structure, 2 more unfold from the debris. They're learning, adapting to our fire patterns." "Of course they are," Aderin muttered. "That's the nature of the trial. They test our strength by escalating their own." The commander swallowed. "Then we're fighting a losing battle." "Only if we fail to adapt faster," Aderin said. She turned to Joram. "We need mobile artillery on the front line. Bring in the Thunder Lance batteries. Target the connection nodes on those spires, the places where the growth segments meet. That's where their energy channels converge. The commander blinked. How do you know? I fought them earlier, she said simply. Their constructs have consistent architectural weaknesses. The commander nodded sharply. Yes, Commander. Officers relayed the orders. Within minutes, Thunderlance artillery vehicles rolled into position. Their elongated barrels glowed with charging energy. Aderin watched the spires, counting the pulses of alien light. They beat like hearts. She waited. 1, 2, 3, fire! A barrage of Thunderlance beams cut across the battlefield. The beams struck the connection nodes with pinpoint accuracy. The spires convulsed, their surfaces rippling violently. Cracks formed across the structures, growing into fractures, then ruptures. Explosions of biomechanical matter erupted outward. Drones near the spires fell lifeless, their bodies collapsing like puppets severed from strings. Cheers rose from human troops along the line. But Aderin raised a hand. Do not celebrate yet, they will shift strategy. As if on cue, the ground began to tremble. Soldiers steadied themselves. Aderin's eyes narrowed as she stared into the smoke-filled horizon. Shadows twisted, shapes formed, something enormous began to rise. A monstrous figure emerged from the remains of the shattered spires, four-legged, towering, plated in the same void metal the drones were made of. Its head resembled a faceted blade. Its limbs gleamed with shifting geometry, as though reality itself bent around its joints. A Titan-class construct, Joram whispered. We've seen nothing like it. It's a direct escalation, Aderin said. A reaction to our success. The Titan let out a low, resonating vibration that pressed against every human mind. Soldiers winced and clutched their heads, some staggered backwards. Aderin stood firm, teeth gritted, resisting the pressure like a mountain resisting the wind. The Titan charged. Its steps cracked the earth. Tanks opened fire. Plasma bolts struck its armor, leaving only faint scorch marks. Thunderlance beams fired but refracted off its surfaces like light bending around a prism. Joram cursed. Commander, none of our weapons are breaking through. Aderin assessed its movement patterns, searching for a flaw. The Titan moved with heavy momentum, but its stride was predictable, its joints large and exposed during transitions. Its balance shifted to the rear before each ground strike. Its limbs compressed before each lunge, all patterns, all exploitable. Aim for the leg joints, Aderin commanded, specifically the inner segments. They're bearing too much weight during its charge. The artillery teams adjusted their aim, combat frames repositioned, infantry lured the Titan forward, the construct lunged, and humanity answered. A synchronized barrage struck its joint assemblies. With a shuddering crack, one massive leg buckled. The Titan toppled, crashing into the earth with a force that shook the ground. But it did not remain fallen. Segments along its body began to detach, unfolding into smaller combat forms, sleek, blade-limbed creatures that darted with terrifying speed. They swarmed toward the trenches. Soldiers opened fire desperately. Aderin grabbed a fallen plasma rifle from the ground. Hold the line, she shouted, raising the weapon. She fired, not with the practiced stance of a marksman, but with the precision of someone who had lived her entire life in the shadow of conflict. Each shot struck a vital component. Each strike bought another second. Joram fought beside her, striking down one creature after another. The line trembled, but did not break. Then a sudden surge of energy erupted from behind the Titan's fallen body. Aderin looked up sharply. A new entity hovered above the battlefield, humanoid in outline but composed of shifting latticework and luminous angles. A being more refined, more focused, more deliberate than the Sovereign Echo's initial avatar. Its gaze fell directly upon Aderin. Every soldier felt the weight of its attention, but only Aderin felt the direct intrusion, sharp, probing, insistent. She pushed back with all her strength. You will not break me, she growled. The being spoke inwardly, its presence like burning frost. You adapt, you endure, you resist. Its form brightened. Your species shows potential. Continue the trial. With a single gesture, the being emitted a pulse that reactivated the surviving drones, commanding them to withdraw. The Titan's remnants collapsed into inert fragments. The battlefield fell eerily quiet. The alien presence vanished into the sky. Joram collapsed to one knee, gasping. They retreated. Aderin lowered her rifle slowly. Around her, soldiers stared in disbelief. No, she said. They ended this phase of the trial. She looked toward the void entity looming beyond the atmosphere, silent, watchful, testing, always testing. This was only the beginning. But in that moment of devastation and smoke, with humanity bloodied but standing, Aderin felt something fierce ignite within her chest. The sovereign echo had expected humanity to break. Instead, they had adapted. They had fought. They had survived, and now humanity would answer. With fire, with will, with unity. The next trial would come soon, and when it did, the invaders would learn the truth that had defined humanity across millennia. Nothing in the universe fought harder than a species that refused to kneel. The world beneath the luminous strata of the quiescent megastructure felt heavier than anything the travelers had encountered before, as though the air itself had absorbed the weight of expectations carried through eons. The towering conduits that rose from the canyon floor pulsed with a dim resonance like the heartbeat of a being too large for comprehension, and every vibration passed through the boots of the explorers until they seemed part of the vast geometry now awakening around them. Veyron moved at the center of the group, jaw clenched with the steady purpose that had held him together since the great upheaval on the plateau. His stride was deceptively calm, but the tense set of his shoulders revealed a man measuring every possibility, dismissing none. The others paced around him, Kaema with her sharp focused stare alternating between the terrain and the sky above as though expecting it to split open. Raylith with tightened fingers wrapped around the grip of his crystalline implement. Yara maintaining her pace with a quiet calculation that had proved invaluable so far. All of them traveled in absolute focus, yet a shared unease threaded their attention, for the structures had begun to hum with an intelligence that felt pointed and newly aware. No one said a word at first, because each could feel that speaking would be like breathing too loudly in a chamber sacred and fraught with living memory. Whatever dwelled within this realm was ancient, and ancient intelligences rarely suffered careless intrusion. They pressed deeper along the axis of the revealed corridor, moving through shifting polygons of radiant alloy that bridged their path and rearranged themselves once the travelers passed. The atmospheric haze thinned until the surfaces gleamed more sharply, and the filaments embedded in the walls glowed brighter, spiraling into patterns that were no longer random. Kaema slowed her pace and scribbled observations onto her slate, which updated with a slow flicker as though reluctant to touch the wavelengths of the place. She muttered an explanation that each symbol now mirrored harmonic equations, waves describing the way massive objects communicated across dimensional folds. It was the kind of phenomenon associated with starborn cultures long vanished, or with beings who transcended physical bodies altogether. Her words flowed quickly, each carrying implications that made the air feel thinner. They all felt something now, a low pull at the edge of perception, like a gravitational shift forming not in the chest, but in the mind. The megastructure was not simply a construct. It was the remnant of an intelligence capable of reshaping the universe through principles the travelers had only begun to perceive. The corridor widened into a chamber so vast the ceiling dissolved into distant arcs of faintly glimmering pathways. Columns stretched upward, merging with the filaments like roots feeding the sky. A centerpiece occupied the heart of the chamber, a sphere of interwoven crystal bands rotating independently, each inscribed with luminous patterns that shifted as the sphere moved. The sight fixed the group in place. It was not a machine in any conventional sense. Its surfaces flowed like glass but vibrated with organic resonance, and when Veyron stepped forward, it slowed its rotation as though acknowledging his presence. Raylith took a sharp breath, his eyes wide with reverent shock. He whispered that the sphere resembled the mythical gate of ideation spoken of in fragmented records recovered from the shattered star libraries, a construct that once linked minds to universal currents of possibility. Those records were incomplete, dismissed by most as imaginative metaphors, but the sphere before them pulsed with undeniable intent. Something was awakening from within it. A hush fell over them as beams of prismatic light unfurled from the sphere and formed a lattice that hovered in the air like a woven tapestry of pure thought. The light coalesced into a humanoid outline without distinct features, yet even in its abstract form, it radiated presence. The being seemed aware of each of them simultaneously. A tide of impressions rippled across the space, brushing their thoughts gently but unmistakably. Veyron stood transfixed, but his mind braced with the iron will of a man who had grown accustomed to impossibly high stakes. A voice not truly a voice, but an impulse processed by their minds into language filled the chamber. It conveyed a greeting older than their species, but tinged with relief, as though the being had feared it would never be found. Kayama's breath caught. She recognized fragments of frequency patterns now translated into words. They spoke of an age when entire star clusters communicated like neurons in a cosmic brain, and of an impending collapse that forced the ancients to scatter their knowledge across protected sanctuaries. This chamber was one such sanctuary, built to endure until a new species capable of understanding arrived. What astonished the group most was the revelation that humanity itself had once stood at the threshold of discovering these principles, long before their distant ancestors diverged into the forms known today. The being implied that the human species carried latent potential woven into its cognitive architecture, potential that could interface with universal harmonics far beyond traditional physics. For ages, the megastructure had waited to test whether modern humanity still carried the capacity to perceive and interpret its resonance. The fact that this group had reached the chamber proved the first stage of that test was complete. Yara trembled slightly. She had always believed humanity's survival was a testament to adaptability, yet now she saw that their survival meant much more than endurance. It meant they were one of the few species still shaped by ancient resonance patterns, capable of either unlocking or destroying the pathways that connected civilizations across the stars. The being extended an arm-like projection, and the sphere began to rotate faster, shedding layers of translucent data. Images rippled through the air, vast cosmic structures unraveling, ancient alliances shattered by internal discord, luminous strands connecting worlds like synapses, and then fracturing under relentless pressure. The travelers watched scenes of unimaginable civilizations rising and falling, each linked to the megastructure's purpose. Kayama scribbled feverishly, but even she knew her notes captured only the shallowest fragments of what unfolded. The revelation hit Veyron hardest. Humanity had not been chosen for this role, nor had they inherited it by fortune. They had survived through a pattern of impossible struggles that mirrored the ancient stars' cycles of collapse and renewal. Their very instincts, the drive to protect, to rebuild, to push forward despite overwhelming adversity, synced with the harmonics encoded into the chamber's structure. In this place, humanity was not small. It was the heir to a responsibility older than recorded time. Just as the sphere began forming new projections, the chamber trembled. The filaments darkened at their edges, pulsing with warning flashes. The being's outline flickered, its once fluid shape marred by static distortions. Something beyond the chamber was waking as well, something not born of the luminous design, but of the shadows between dimensions. Raylith pointed upward toward the dissolving pathways where fissures of obsidian hue spread like cracks across a polished mirror. The air thickened with an aura of malevolent intent. The being reached outward, not in aggression, but in urgency, and the travelers felt a surge of information pressed into their thoughts. It showed that the megastructure had not only protected ancient knowledge, it had contained ancient threats. When the starborn civilizations fell, their enemies' entities shaped more from conceptual impulses than matter sought to sever the universal harmonics from which all intelligent life derived its meaning. Those entities had been sealed away but were now stirring again, drawn by the reawakening of the megastructure. Veyron regained his voice first, asking what they must do. The being's answer came through like a wave crashing against a fragile dock. The megastructure could activate its full resonance only through direct human interface. But the process would be dangerous, requiring a mind strong enough to endure the onslaught of cosmic data without fracturing. Kayama stepped forward, arguing that they should work together, that the task could not be entrusted to one person alone. Yet the being insisted that the harmonics required a singular conductor to initiate the sequence, a mind that could withstand the currents and then direct them outward. Yara immediately moved to Veyron's side, sensing the ancient intelligence had already determined its choice. The being had felt the steadiness of Veyron's will, the unyielding courage forged through 12 years of struggle and loss. It had recognized a mind that, while scarred, held the resilience necessary to endure universal resonance. Veyron did not deny the logic of it. He had always known that each step forward in their journey would demand heavier burdens, yet the acceptance of so colossal a responsibility made him pause. He looked at his companions not as comrades, but as extensions of his own resolve. Kayama met his gaze, her eyes shimmering with pride and fear. Raylith laid a hand on his shoulder, strong and steady. Yara whispered to him that he was not alone, no matter what path he would walk within the sphere. Their trust did not lighten the weight, but it aligned his soul with the purpose now rising within him. The fissures above split wider, releasing tendrils of obsidian smoke that slithered downward like sentient storms. The room darkened, and the being's form wavered. If Veyron did not act now, the megastructure would collapse into catastrophe. He stepped into the lattice of light. The sphere's bands widened, forming a gateway of shimmering contours. As he entered, pressure enveloped him from all directions, pressing against his thoughts with near-suffocating intensity. He gritted his teeth and kept moving. More tendrils poured from the cracks above, and Raylith struck at them with bursts of crystalline force, each impact sending shockwaves of energy through the chamber. Kayama used her slate to redirect defensive filaments, while Yara created barriers of kinetic distortion. They fought not to protect Veyron's body that remained untouched, but to keep the invasive shadows from disrupting the resonance process. The sphere's energy lifted Veyron from the floor, suspending him at its center. Streams of luminous patterns pierced straight into his mind, bypassing language and memory to reach the core of his consciousness. At first, he felt as though drowning in stars, his thoughts scattered across a sea of shifting worlds, each representing potential timelines branching infinitely. But gradually, the chaos aligned, and he realized he was not losing himself. He was integrating the megastructure's knowledge into his own perceptions. He felt the subtle vibrations of every star in the nearby clusters, sensed the fragile dance of energy threads linking life across galaxies, and understood the delicate equilibrium that allowed civilizations to rise. He also felt the pressure of invasive darkness pushing against the boundaries of the chamber, eager to devour the luminous harmonics being restored. The more he understood, the more the weight grew upon him, until it nearly crushed his sense of individuality. But Veyron remembered who he was: not a vessel for ancient power, but a human forged by choices, loyalty, and the stubborn refusal to surrender. The sphere responded to his determination. Its harmonics surged outward, amplifying through the chamber and forming a vast protective dome. The tendrils shrieked in silent agony, recoiling in patterns of distorted motion. Kayama and the others felt the dome's pressure stabilize the space, granting them a momentary reprieve. For the first time since they entered the megastructure, hope felt like a tangible force. Veyron's consciousness expanded without breaking, his mind becoming the conductor of a symphony far larger than himself. The being's presence returned, cleaner and brighter, no longer flickering. It guided Veyron not by giving commands, but by synchronizing his thoughts with the ancient frequencies. Together, they directed the resonant currents to seal the dimensional fissures and restore stability. But the threat was greater than simple fissures. The shadows dragged themselves into forms resembling skeletal constructs, their joints bending in impossible geometries. They lunged at the dome with renewed ferocity. One broke through Raylith's defensive formation, brushing against his arm with a swipe that left his flesh marked by a cold, crawling sensation that spread rapidly. Yara rushed to him, using energy pressure to isolate the corruption. Kayama diverted more filaments into defensive patterns as the chamber shook under the strain. Veyron sensed their struggle from within the sphere. He could not communicate verbally, but he surged the harmonics outward again, strengthening the dome and pushing the shadows back. Each pulse weakened him slightly, draining not his life, but the structure of his own thoughts. He was beginning to fray, but he held firm. Time within the sphere no longer followed a linear sequence. Veyron lived moments simultaneously, seeing his past as though watching a star collapse, feeling the chamber's present tremors, perceiving futures branching like rivers of divergent light. In one path, he saw the chamber consumed by shadows and his companions falling one by one. In another, the megastructure stabilized long enough to transmit its knowledge to the wider galaxy. In countless others, humanity stood on the brink of ascension or annihilation. He realized the ancient being had not chosen him merely for his strength. It had chosen him because he understood the cost of every decision. He had lived through the agony of sacrifice and the burden of responsibility. And now, faced with infinite possibilities, he chose the path where humanity survived not through domination or conquest, but through understanding and resilience. The chamber erupted in radiant waves. The fissures sealed, leaving behind faint scars that shimmered like healing wounds. The skeletal shadows dissolved into streaks of dissipating smoke, pulled back into the void between dimensions. Raylith collapsed, panting, but the cold marks on his arm stopped spreading. Yara supported him, relief washing through her eyes. Kayama steadied herself against a column, breath trembling with exhilaration. As the last remnants of darkness faded, the sphere slowed its rotation. Its bands relaxed, lowering Veyron gently to the floor. The lattice around him dissipated. He opened his eyes. They flickered with reflections of the harmonics that still echoed through his mind, but his gaze remained unmistakably his own, determined, exhausted, yet unwavering. The being approached, its outline more defined now, as though restored by the resonance. It conveyed gratitude but also caution. The stabilizing of the megastructure was only the first step. The ancient enemies had not been destroyed, only repelled. The travelers had awakened a chain of events that would ripple across galaxies. If humanity embraced this new knowledge wisely, they could restore balance to a universe fractured by forgotten wars. If not, the shadows would return stronger than before. Veyron reached out and touched the surface of the sphere. A pulse of light passed from it into him, sealing a connection that would allow the megastructure to share visions and warnings across great distances. His companions gathered around him, each feeling the weight of what lay ahead. But though the chamber no longer vibrated with imminent danger, the air now carried a sense of purpose that none could deny. They had passed a threshold most civilizations never approached. The path forward would demand strength, unity, and profound courage. Yet for the first time, the ancient being no longer looked upon them as unlikely inheritors of responsibility. It looked upon them as partners in the preservation of cosmic harmony. The ascent from the chamber of harmonics began in an atmosphere so transformed that even the metallic tang of the air seemed newly charged with intention. The pathways leading upward were no longer shifting unpredictably. Instead, They had stabilized into a series of luminescent arches that rose in organized intervals, as though the megastructure were guiding the travelers gently toward their next destination. Veyron walked at a measured pace, his body steady, but his mind burdened with the aftershocks of resonance. His vision occasionally blurred into patterns of fractal geometry before settling back into clarity. He concealed these disturbances as best he could, unwilling to alarm the others, though Kayama watched him with a gaze too perceptive to miss the signs. She said nothing, trusting that he would speak if the disturbances grew dangerous. Still, she stayed close enough to intervene should the resonance overwhelm him. The corridors grew narrower, their walls embedded with crystalline arrays that pulsed with a warm glow reminiscent of distant star clusters. These lights formed a trail of subtle shifts in hue, guiding them deeper toward what the ancient being had identified as the Chamber of Continuity. The name alone suggested a place where timelines, structures, or forms of consciousness converged, though none of them yet understood what that meant. The being followed without walking, drifting like a floating veil of luminescence, subtly anchoring itself to the shifting architecture. Its presence brought comfort even as it stirred awe. More than once, Yara glanced toward it, unable to shake the sense that the being might vanish if she blinked too long. Raylath, meanwhile, kept his crystalline staff drawn, not because he expected immediate threat, but because he believed threats of unimaginable nature often emerged when moments felt safest. As they weaved through the ascending structure, the lights at the edges of the corridor began to flicker erratically, no longer with impending danger, but with signs of active internal recalibration. The megastructure, awakened by Veyron's resonance interface, was repairing systems that had lain dormant for eons. At times, the travelers passed through sections where the walls unfolded into holographic projections of star systems long vanished, nebulae collapsing into voids, and the birth of planets that might never exist in their timeline. Kayama slowed frequently to observe these visions, taking as many notes as she could despite the overwhelming scale of information. But even she knew that interpretation would require years of study. The key insights would come later. For now, survival demanded attention to the path ahead. The group finally arrived at a wide platform that overlooked a vast expanse. Beneath them stretched a shifting landscape woven of metallic plains, geometric forests of branching silver towers, and glowing rivers of energy coursing through the terrain like veins of a living world. Each river pulsed with pulses of light, corresponding to the harmonics Veyron had experienced within the sphere. The ancient being gestured toward the landscape, its form dimming briefly as if weighed by memory. It conveyed that this was a fragment of the inner world, an isolated dimension created to preserve not physical artifacts, but the conceptual foundations upon which civilizations were built. This world contained the architectural essence of knowledge, identity, and the connectivity that allowed species to rise into cooperative harmony. But the collapse of the starborn civilizations had fractured these foundations, and now parts of this inner world teetered on the brink of dissolution. The being pointed toward a distant structure rising above the metallic forests like an enormous crystalline obelisk of twisting shapes. The Chamber of Continuity resided within that structure. To reach it, the travelers would have to descend into the inner world and cross regions still unstable from ancient conflict. Veyron nodded, feeling a subtle tug in his mind, drawing him toward the obelisk. The resonance had left an imprint on him, a faint signature that the megastructure now recognized as a focal point. This made him both a key and a beacon, which worried Yara deeply. Anything drawn to the megastructure's awakening might sense that beacon as well. Their descent began along a glimmering bridge that threaded through the luminous canopy of branching silver towers. Each tower resonated with harmonic vibrations that shimmered through the air like waves of heat. At intervals, these towers released pulses that altered the surrounding space. Distances stretched or shrank subtly as they walked, creating optical illusions that strained their perception. Raylith muttered a curse under his breath at one point when a tower's pulse caused the bridge to appear to twist sideways. But the effect passed quickly, leaving them disoriented but unharmed. Kayama explained that the inner world operated on principles of conceptual architecture, meaning space responded not just to physical construction, but to accumulated meaning. When the ancient civilizations thrived, these fluctuations represented creative adaptability. Now, fragmented by millennia of decay, they manifested as unpredictable distortions. About halfway across the bridge, Veyron paused. He felt pressure in his mind, not painful but insistent, like a whisper rising from the depths of a vast ocean. The others halted immediately. The being drifted closer, sensing the resonance blossoming within him. A surge of imagery flooded his consciousness, visions of the chamber of continuity, the fractured timelines branching around it, and a threat approaching from beyond the inner world's edge. The threat felt like a ripple of hunger, formless yet purposeful. The shadows that invaded the chamber earlier had been fragments of a larger intelligence one ancient civilizations had called the void of reversion. This presence consumed meaning, unraveling knowledge until civilizations collapsed into primal instinct. It was not inherently evil, it was an opposing force within the cosmic balance. But now, awakened after millennia, it sought to reclaim what the megastructure had preserved. The pressure subsided as quickly as it came. Veyron inhaled slowly, then signaled that they should keep moving. He chose not to share the full weight of what he sensed, at least not yet. He knew the others needed clarity to face the path ahead, not the suffocating dread the vision had instilled in him. They resumed their descent through the metallic forest, eventually reaching a region where the ground pulsed with concentric rings of light. Each ring hummed with a frequency that resonated with different emotions: curiosity, determination, grief, wonder, fear, and 1,000 others too subtle to name. Passing through these rings affected each traveler differently. Kayama felt clarity sharpen her mind, but also grief swell in her heart as memories of the scientific communities she had lost returned. Yara's stride grew steadier, yet she shivered as echoes of fear tried to seep into her mind. Raylith's grip tightened on his staff as determination drowned out his hesitation. When Veyron stepped across the rings, they exploded in a burst of brilliant white light. The shockwave knocked the others back a step, and even the ancient being recoiled. The rings collapsed inward toward Veyron like a spiral drawn tight enough to distort space. For a moment, his form flickered, and they feared he would vanish. But then the light stabilized and diffused around him. Kayama hurried forward, demanding to know what had happened. The being responded before Veyron could speak. The ring formation had recognized his resonance signature and rewritten itself to align with his internal frequency. In ancient times, such a reaction occurred only when one with the potential to connect directly with continuity passed through. This potential did not necessarily make him the chosen one, it simply meant he could withstand the chamber's environment without being torn apart. Still, the implications made the group uneasy. The chamber of continuity was not merely a repository, it was a node where timelines intertwined. Those who entered without proper resonance risked unraveling themselves across multiple realities. The air trembled as the landscape ahead began to shift again. Towers rearranged themselves like roots twisting in slow motion. A wide chasm opened suddenly across their path, releasing a rush of cold air that carried a faint whisper too faint to form words, yet unmistakably sentient. Yara instinctively pulled Veyron backward, while Raylith raised his staff defensively, but the being signaled that the chasm was not an attack. It was a realignment triggered by the void's growing influence. The inner world was reacting like a living organism sensing infection. A new bridge formed, composed of interlocking prisms that refracted the environment into kaleidoscopic fragments. Walking across it, felt like stepping through a series of alternate worlds, each containing slightly altered versions of themselves. At one point, Veyron paused when he glimpsed an alternate form of the group in another timeline, one in which he was not leading, but Kayama was. In another fragment, Raylath's crystalline staff glowed with a different hue, as though infused with another type of energy. In yet another, Yara appeared older, as though decades had passed. These illusions hinted at the infinite paths branching from every decision, but they were not warnings. They were reminders that continuity protected possibility as much as stability. Reaching the far side of the Prism Bridge, they approached a valley where the metallic ground dipped into concentric terraces. Each terrace hosted towering constructs resembling colossal hourglasses made of luminous sand. The sand moved upward instead of downward, defying gravity as though time flowed in reverse. The ancient being explained that these hourglasses represented stabilized fragments of potential timelines, preserved as conceptual anchors to maintain universal coherence. The void's influence was already visible. Some hourglasses flickered violently, their sands trapped in chaotic loops. If left unchecked, the entire valley would collapse into temporal rupture. Veyron felt a pull from the center of the valley. There, atop the lowest terrace, lay a crystalline disk floating above the ground. It glowed faintly in rhythm with his heartbeat. Without waiting for instruction, he walked toward it, sensing instinctively that this disk was a gateway that would lead them directly to the chamber of continuity. His companions followed, though each felt the weight of the valley's temporal distortions pressing against their thoughts. The ancient being drifted beside them, its light dimmer now, strained by the void's growing presence. Upon stepping onto the crystalline disk, the valley around them evaporated into pure light. The transition was abrupt, but not disorienting. Instead, it felt like passing through a perfectly executed harmonic chord, a shift from one reality to another. When the light faded, the travelers stood before the chamber of continuity. The chamber rose like a cathedral carved from shifting prisms. Every surface emitted gentle ripples of luminescence that flowed upward toward a vast central structure, an immense confluence of crystalline pillars fused at their peaks. This central structure pulsed like a cosmic heartbeat, and within its core swirled a vortex of shimmering timelines. The travelers could feel the pulse in their bones, each beat echoing through time itself. The ancient being drifted ahead, its form brightening as it entered the chamber. It turned toward the group, projecting a message heavy with both hope and sorrow. The chamber of continuity held the combined potential of all civilizations connected through ancient harmonics. If stabilized, it could restore balance to the inner world and prevent the void from overwhelming it. But stabilization required a direct mental interface, one far more complex than the resonance Veyron had endured earlier. The interface demanded not only clarity of mind, but the ability to anchor oneself across multiple conceptual states of existence. Failure could shatter a mind into countless fragments scattered across divergent timelines. Kayama stepped forward immediately, volunteering to assist Veyron. But the being warned that the interface allowed only one direct conductor, though others could anchor the conductor from the outside. Raylath and Yara both agreed instantly that they would anchor him. Veyron accepted silently, knowing there was no alternative. At the center of the chamber, a platform rose from the ground, forming a ring of crystalline nodes arranged in a spiral. Veyron stepped onto the platform. The vortex above flared in response, its timelines twisting into luminous threads that reached toward him. Yara took his left shoulder. Raylath placed his staff against Veyron's back, channeling stabilizing energy. Kayama laid a hand over his right arm, grounding him with her steady presence. The ancient being hovered overhead, synchronizing the chamber's harmonics. The interface initiated. Veyron's mind exploded into countless streams of perception. He felt himself stretch across impossible distances, not physically, but conceptually as timelines intertwined with his consciousness. He saw humanity's past, present, and potential futures unfolding like petals of a vast cosmic flower. He saw alternate versions of himself, some younger, some older, some hardened by loss, some softened by peace. He saw civilizations rising from oceans of molten glass, species communicating through shifting ultraviolet flares, and worlds where thought alone shaped reality. Each vision carried weight, and each threatened to tear him apart. Yara tightened her grip, grounding him through sheer emotional force. Raylath channeled stabilizing energy, though it drained him rapidly. Kayama whispered steady sequences of numbers and patterns, reinforcing the conceptual anchoring. Veyron clenched onto the sound of her voice, using it like a rope to hold onto himself. Then the void struck. A wave of impenetrable darkness surged into the chamber, slamming against the harmonics. The vortex convulsed as dozens of timelines snapped into chaotic spirals. The floor trembled beneath the anchors, the ancient being flickered violently, struggling to hold the void at bay. Veyron felt the darkness rush toward him not as physical force, but as erasure. It tried to dismantle his sense of identity, dissolve his memories, and strip away meaning from every part of him. He screamed not out loud, but within the resonant domain, forcing himself to anchor onto the memory of the moment he accepted this mission. He anchored to the faces of Kayama, Yara, and Raylath. He anchored to humanity itself, the frail, stubborn, brilliant species that had defied extinction time and again. The vortex responded. Timelines realigned, pulling away from the void's influence. The chamber shook violently as Veyron forced the threads of continuity back into harmony. It was a brutal struggle, pushing him to the brink of dissolution. But piece by piece, with the unwavering support of his companions, he restored stability. In a final surge of resonance, the chamber pulsed with blinding light. The void shrieked and withdrew, its presence shattered across the conceptual boundary. The timelines settled into luminous order. The chamber of continuity was stabilized. Veyron collapsed, caught by his companions before he hit the ground. The ancient being drifted closer, its form restored and brighter than before. It conveyed gratitude and awe. The travelers had accomplished what entire civilizations had failed to achieve. But there remained one final step, an ascent to the pinnacle of harmonized realities, where the megastructure would reveal the ultimate truth behind the cosmic balance. The vessel drifted beyond the outer ring of fractured moons, its hull still carrying the faint scorch marks of the last desperate exchange. Inside, the illumination panels glowed at half strength, casting the corridors in a soft pallor that made every surface seem both familiar and strangely new. The survivors moved with a mixture of exhaustion and sharpened purpose, sensing that what lay ahead would define everything they had endured. A gathering formed in the central chamber, where the polished alloy floor reflected the figures standing upon it. The tall navigation specialist leaned on the railing that encircled the primary projection table, studying the swirling representation of the stellar gulf ahead. He breathed slowly, as though each inhale steadied a lifetime of uncertainty. When the others approached, he lifted his gaze, tracing the faces of companions he had nearly lost more times than he wished to count. The elder engineer, whose beard carried a streak of metallic gray from exposure to particulate storms, stepped forward and set a block-shaped data core onto the table. It pulsed with a faint blue rhythm, echoing the beating of some mechanical heart. He explained that the core contained the final transmissions recovered from the ancient network beneath the outpost they had abandoned only days earlier. The messages were fragmented, corrupted by centuries of cosmic decay, yet there remained enough structure to suggest a pattern. These fragments hinted at a deeper origin behind the colossal constructs they had encountered throughout their journey, structures that had defied logic, structures whose purpose eluded even the most determined interpretation. As the projection expanded, the walls seemed to bend with it. The points of light that formed the map stretched outward until they filled the chamber, enveloping the group in the illusion of floating through raw starlight. More shapes appeared: arcs, spirals, converging lattices, none resembling known astronomical formations. The linguist, who had become the unofficial interpreter of every strange glyph they had discovered, murmured that these forms were not celestial diagrams, but something more akin to instructions. The realization settled upon them like dust stirred from ancient ruins. The makers of these constructs had charted not the position of stars, but the evolution of minds. As if awakened by that conclusion, the data core emitted a resonant hum. Streams of encoded symbols raced across the projection, forming patterns that shifted too rapidly for comprehension. The vessel's artificial intelligence attempted to stabilize the feed, channeling power from non-essential systems to maintain integrity. When the storm of symbols finally slowed, a single continuous spiral remained, pulsing softly. The spiral was unlike anything they had encountered, though simple in appearance. It carried a density of meaning that strained the boundaries of language. The navigator felt an instinctive understanding that the spiral marked a destination, a place beyond the mapped regions of charted space, a region to which no vessel from any known civilization had ventured. Before the group could debate the next course of action, the hull reverberated with a tremor. Warning lights flared along the corridor, and the artificial intelligence reported that an unidentified field of energy had enveloped the vessel's perimeter. The scientist with copper-brown eyes hurried toward the nearest console, her fingers flying across the controls as she attempted to measure the disturbance. What she found astonished her. The energy field was not hostile. Instead, it assessed. It measured, it evaluated, and then it receded, as though satisfied with whatever it had discovered. The crew exchanged glances, each recognizing that the same question burned in every mind. Had the builders of the constructs just taken notice of them? The navigator spoke first. He declared that the only way to understand the phenomenon was to follow the spiral's coordinates and confront whatever intelligence lay at the end. The elder engineer cautioned that such a journey could lead them into conditions their vessel was not designed to withstand. Yet the alternative, turning away and forever wondering, seemed to weigh even more heavily. After a long silence that felt like the drawing of breath before a plunge into icy depths, every individual voiced agreement. Within the hour, the vessel oriented itself toward the uncharted void. A faint vibration rippled through the hull as the engines engaged, their output harmonized to a frequency derived from the spiral pattern. The artificial intelligence warned that the destination was at a distance exceeding previously recorded navigation parameters, and that travel would require multiple consecutive warp cycles without conventional cooling intervals. Even so, the crew instructed it to proceed. The first warp cycle stretched the stars into radiant threads. As the vessel leapt forward, the sensation of motion became a layered distortion of perception, as if time itself loosened and reformed in rippling sheets. When normal space returned, the crew found themselves in a region where the stars seemed arranged in unnatural symmetry. They observed clusters forming perfect tetrahedral arrays and nebulous clouds spiraling around invisible axes. The scientist realized that these celestial formations were being shaped by immense gravitational manipulators, machines of unimaginable scale that molded the very fabric of astrophysical matter. The second warp cycle carried them through a corridor of ionized currents that shimmered with colors outside the familiar spectrum. Within these currents drifted fragments of shattered constructs, immense metallic petals, coils of crystalline conduits, and fragments of curved plating large enough to enclose entire cities. Some pieces bore markings identical to those discovered in the outpost ruins. Others displayed patterns so complex they seemed alive. The linguist ran comparisons across every known language, but the output suggested the symbols were not written for organic minds. They were designed for perception in higher dimensions. By the time the vessel initiated the third warp cycle, Fatigue gnawed at every crew member. Sleep came in brief, uneasy intervals haunted by impressions of incomprehensible shapes tracing the edges of thought. Yet in these dreams lingered a strange assurance, as though whatever intelligence guided the spiral had no desire to harm them. When they emerged from the next transition, they found themselves staring at an expanse unlike any encountered before. Before them hung a colossal structure, far larger than any known megastructure. Its outer surface resembled a sphere, though composed of interlocking geometric plates that shifted position in slow, deliberate motions. These movements produced ripples across the surrounding space, bending starlight and warping gravitational gradients. The vessel decelerated, approaching cautiously. As they neared the sphere, they discovered that it was hollow. A vast aperture opened toward them, revealing a luminous chamber large enough to contain a dozen planetary systems. Within this chamber floated strands of glowing filaments, each several kilometers thick. The filaments were arranged in braided layers, pulsing with rhythms reminiscent of neural activity. The linguist whispered that the chamber resembled an enormous mind. Before the vessel could retreat, a resonance filled the chamber, vibrating not only through the hull, but through the bones of every living occupant. The artificial intelligence reported that the resonance was a communication attempt, one that bypassed sound and language entirely, reaching directly into cognition. The navigator felt a surge of impressions, a sense of vast age, of patience stretching across millions of years, and a gentle acknowledgement that the travelers had reached the threshold of something long prepared. The resonance conveyed a vision of an era long past, when the makers of the constructs had once guided countless species toward intellectual and moral flourishing. They had shaped stars, mentored civilizations, and uplifted minds incapable of perceiving their own potential. But as time stretched on, those species grew dependent. They ceased striving, content to rely on the guidance of their benefactors. The makers realized their presence hindered growth rather than nurturing it. So they withdrew, dismantling much of their grand network and retreating into this final sanctuary, where they waited for a species capable of reaching them not through dependence, but through will, courage, and a persistent hunger for understanding. The resonance communicated that humanity, or more precisely, the group aboard the vessel, represented the first such species in countless epochs. Though they had struggled, though they had nearly perished many times over, they had sought knowledge without expectation of reward or salvation. They had acted not out of blind obedience, but out of determination to understand the universe on their own terms. The chamber brightened as filaments realigned, forming a shape resembling an outstretched hand. The gesture was not literal, for the makers held no physical form within the chamber. It was symbolic, a greeting extended across unimaginable distances of time and thought. The navigator felt a swell of awe, so profound it bordered on pain. He understood that they were being offered something extraordinary, the accumulated insight of a civilization whose mastery of reality transcended the boundaries of matter and perception. Yet the resonance carried a warning as well. This gift, if accepted carelessly, could unravel entire societies. Minds unprepared for such revelations could fracture. Worlds could fall into chaos. The makers asked if humanity was ready not as a test, but as a responsibility. The crew exchanged glances, though no words were spoken. They understood the gravity of the moment. They also knew that turning away would condemn future generations to wander blindly in the dark, deprived of the tools needed to confront the cosmic forces that shaped their existence. The navigator finally voiced acceptance. The chamber's light intensified until the boundaries of the vessel dissolved into radiance. Every consciousness aboard felt itself momentarily unmoored, drifting through currents of pure understanding. They saw the birth of stars and the quiet dissolution of ancient galaxies. They felt the harmonies underlying quantum fluctuations. They perceived the interconnectedness of all evolving minds across the ages. And then the light dimmed. The vessel returned to form, resting gently within the chamber as though cradled by unseen hands. The crew woke to find themselves unchanged physically, yet carrying within their thoughts a clarity unlike anything they had known before. They had not been granted omniscience. Instead, they had received frameworks, conceptual architectures that allowed them to pursue answers on their own, building upon the foundation laid by the makers without becoming dependent on them. The resonance spoke one last time, conveying gratitude. The makers would continue to observe, but only from afar. They would never again intervene directly in the evolution of rising species. The path forward now belonged to humanity. As the vessel withdrew from the chamber, the aperture slowly closed behind them. The colossal sphere grew distant, eventually blending into the starfield until it became indistinguishable from the cosmic backdrop. The navigator felt a gentle ache of parting, like leaving behind a friend met too briefly, but he also felt something deeper, an unwavering belief in the potential of his species. The return journey carried them past the same celestial wonders they had previously encountered, yet now these wonders seemed less alien. They saw purpose in every curve of the gravitational lattices, every contour of the ancient constructs drifting among ionized currents. The universe no longer appeared indifferent. Instead, it felt like a vast canvas shaped by countless hands over countless ages, each adding something meaningful to the whole. When they finally re-entered the familiar regions of mapped space, transmission arrays aboard the vessel activated automatically. A pre-programmed signal burst outward, carrying the location of their homeworld along with an encoded greeting for any listening outposts. It would take time for authorities to respond, yet the crew felt no anxiety. They had learned patience from beings who measured time in stellar cycles. As the vessel drifted toward the inner system, the navigator stood once more beside the projection table. He looked upon the swirling map of stars, remembering the spiral that had guided them into the unknown. He no longer needed its coordinates. The path ahead, every path felt open, accessible, and achievable. Behind him, his companions gathered, their faces illuminated by the same quiet certainty. They had ventured farther than any human before them. They had met minds older than worlds. They had stepped into the heart of the impossible and returned with the promise of what humanity might someday become. Together, they turned their gaze toward home, carrying with them not answers but direction, not certainty but conviction. The vessel glided forward, engines humming in steady rhythm, as if echoing the heartbeat of a species standing at the threshold of a new era. And for the first time in their long journey, the crew allowed themselves to imagine not just survival, but the grand, unbounded future waiting to be shaped.